Hi, my name is Dr. John Douillard, and welcome to our podcast tonight here at LifeSpa.com, where we prove ancient wisdom with modern science. Tonight we have a special guest, Dan Buettner, author of many best-selling books on the blue zones. And I'm going to give you a little introduction about Dan. Dan is a National Geographic Fellow and multiple New York Times best-selling author. He has discovered the 5 places in the world dubbed the blue zones where people live the longest and are the healthiest. His New York Times Sunday Magazine article about these places, the island where people forget to die, was one of the Times' most popular, and his National Geographic cover story, The Secrets of Living Longer, was a finalist for a National Magazine Award. Buettner works in partnership with healthways, municipal governments, and various insurance companies to implement his Blue Zone program into more than 20 cities thus far, and has dramatically improved the health of more than 5 million Americans to date. I don't know if you get this about Dan, but to actually write a book and then implement it into the real world and change people's lives at the level he's doing is nothing short of amazing and miraculous. I am so blown away that I've written books, and I know how it is to change the culture and make a dent in the society. And I am so honored to have him as a guest because he's made such a massive dent in the lives and health and lives of people here in America. So that is just amazing. He has his books, many of them, the Blue Zone books, won the Blue Zone's Lessons for Living Longer from the People Who Have Lived the Longest, Thrive, Finding Happiness in the Blue Zone Way, The Blue Zone Solution. I love this book. It's about changing people's lives here in America. Eating and Living Like the World's Healthiest People, all have remained bestsellers, along with his new book, which is releasing today, The Blue Zone of Happiness, a Blueprint for a Better Life. Dan has appeared on the Today Show, NBC Nightly News, Good Morning America, Dr. Oz. He actually took Dr. Oz to one of the blue zones directly, NPR, Oprah, and Dan holds 3, this is amazing, Guinness Book World Records in distance cycling. And my first question to Dan is, how does a guy who has 3, I'm an endurance athlete, Ironman triathlete, in my day, so I get the endurance thing. One of the most important lessons of these Blue Zone people is to move naturally. How does the guy who has 3 Guinness Book World Records in distance cycling across the Sahara Desert, that one of the things, how does that guy move naturally today? How did you get from that life to this life?
I got old. No, well, when you look at the world's longest lived people, they're actually not running marathons. They're not doing triathlons. They're not pumping iron. They're doing things like walking or gardening, regular low-intensity physical activity. They're probably nudged into moving about once every 20 minutes or so. So their physical activity is spread out over the course of a 14 or 16-hour day. So they're getting as much exercise. It's just not painful.
So how does that relate to people today? Like when you look at what's going on today, people are being motivated to exercise more. We're told in study after study that exercising is the way to hack into longevity, to hack into cognitive decline, and people are exercising in their 1 hour, time of the day. How do you, in your work with the Blue Zone people, how do you get them to have a 16-hour active day? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I'm a bit of a contrarian when it comes to exercise. I think it's been a public health failure since fewer than 20% of Americans get enough exercise to qualify for minimum recommendations. I'm a big believer that if we want to get Americans moving more, we have to reshape our environments so that we're nudged into movements. I'll give you a good example. The simple act of taking a bus to work or to school, that occasions about 19 minutes of physical activity per day, which is more than the average American does right now. And your low chance of heart disease dropped by about 10 or 15%. So rather than trying to hound people or guilt people or sell them something to move more, I'm just a big believer that we deconvenience our homes and we build our cities so that the roads are not just for cars, but they're also for humans. Make sure parks are cleaned up. Go back to the wisdom of our grandparents and have a have a garden out back where, and it seems simple and it seems insignificant, but if you're out weeding and watering and harvesting every day for 4 months, that physical activity counts, and it's range of motion, and it's especially good as people get older and balance issues become more important than just brute strength, which you might be concerned of when you're 20 years old and in singles bars.
So are you suggesting that maybe what we're doing is actually, I get it that it's a failure that only a certain percentage of the population are doing it, but the ones who are they at risk for overdoing it, overtraining, burning out too early, breaking their bodies down to build themselves up?
There's some evidence for that. Humans have been around for about 25,000 generations, and for all but the last, 4 or 5 generations, life expectancy of our species has been about 30 or 31. So we are our machines, our bodies are really only designed for 30 years, and we now want to push it to 2 or 3 times that. So you don't want to be pounding on your body, risking joint damage or ligament damage, or you don't want to ride the vehicle so hard that it's not good for the second 2/3 of our lives. So I'm just saying, when you go to blue zones and you really look at parts of the world where people are making it healthy to age 90 and 100, they're walking, they're shepherds, they're moving, but they're not pounding on themselves, and they're not thinking that they can sit in their office for 8 hours a day and make up for it in 20 minutes at the gym or being the weekend warrior. It's never how we evolved as a species.
So even the persistence runners, like the books like Born to Run, we're suggesting that kind of running maybe created some early breakdowns, some early degeneration that didn't give them the longevity that we're looking at in the blue zones. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, those Mexicans didn't live a particularly long life. Now, I think when you're 20 and maybe 30, your body regenerates pretty quickly and easily. You recuperate from injury. But you get into your 40s, 50s, or 60s, long distance running is probably not as good of an idea. So it just depends how old you are. I mean, you're 25 or something? It's fine for you, Doc.
Yeah, right. So one other question, I think, before I get into your book on happiness, I really want to talk about one of the big questions that everybody has is what to eat, and some of these cultures, like in Okinawa, there's 80% carbohydrates. The Costa Rican group, 68% carbohydrate. In Sardinia, it's 65% carbohydrate. So there's your sort of high carbohydrate diets, very, very low meat diets. So my question is, can you summarize that? Everybody wants to know, how many carbs should I eat? How much protein should I eat? Have you titrated that down to something that people can hold on to, as opposed to just non-processed, good whole foods from your garden?
So carbohydrates is kind of a meaningless term, because you have to remember that both lollipops and lentils are carbohydrates.
Sure.
And when you try to lump them all into the same group and label it good or bad, you get into trouble. So if you look at, we did a meta-analysis, 155 dietary surveys done in all 5 blue zone areas over the last 100 years, and you take the average. The 4 foods that emerge most common, and they're common to all blue zone area, are different kinds of whole grains, greens, and that's very highly associated with longevity. Right. In the Icarian blue zone, they're eating about 80 different types of greens regularly, and they're the type of weeds that we'd weed whack in our backyard. They're making into beautiful pies and salads. And then nuts and beans. And I argue that beans are the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
Very, very, very little sugar, probably about a quarter of the added sugar we have in our diet. And they do eat meat, but meat is mostly a celebratory food, eaten about 5 times a month on average in blue zones, and pretty small portions.
So when you say meat, you're talking about red meat, but some of these cultures do eat a lot of fish. So you're talking about red meat when you say meat?
Well, oddly, they don't eat a lot of fish because the blue zone areas are inland, often a day's journey from the seas. So traditionally, until about 1980 or so, they were eating very little fish. Even in Greece and Sardinia and Okinawa, they're not big fish eating cultures.
Wow, okay.
The type of meat they do eat is pork. You see pork, but again, it's a celebratory food. A little bit on Sunday after church or during the Lunar New Year, they'll slaughter the family pig, but not the kind of breakfast, lunch, and dinner meat consumption that we're used to here in America. And that is indisputably the longest lived Americans, by the way, the Seventh-day Adventists. They're broken up into 3 categories: meat eaters, ovo vegetarians, and then the pure vegetarians. And the vegetarians are living longer. And that's a study that followed 103,000 Americans. So it's gold standard epidemiology. So to make it simple, eat a cup of beans a day.
So when you think about, because meat is such a big issue, I mean, people who are mostly or all vegetarian are living longer. So are we actually suggesting that a vegetarian diet is something that is actually where people should be going? Obviously, we'd feed the planet a whole lot better if we did that.
Indisputably. People are worried about protein, but the average American gets about twice the protein he or she needs. You can get as much protein from beans and rice and sweet potato as you can from eating a burger patty or a steak. So, and if you're eating meat more than twice a day, your chance of diabetes and cancer about triple over time. So, what we saw in the blue zones, and when I look at the evidence that underpins the observations, I've emerged absolutely convinced that a vegetarian diet, very, very, very low meat diet is the way to go. Complex carbohydrates, not the simple carbs.
So you did a lot of your work in Iowa, changing the diets of meat eaters to more of a vegetarian plant-based diet. I find in my practice that a lot of people have difficulty making that transition. A lot of vegetarians are very unhealthy vegetarians. They eat nothing but sugar, and they actually don't fare very, very well. I'm curious, how is it a transition period that these people have to make it to to wean off the meat and get on the vegetables? How do you do with these Midwesterners who are been born and raised on meat? How do they do transitioning to a vegetarian diet?
Well, you want to make plant-based foods cheaper, more accessible, and tastier. So the last thing you want to do is tell people not to do, or scold them, or tell them that meat eating is somehow bad or wrong, but do celebrate plant-based eating. So when we do our citywide programs, we make sure everybody understands the blue zone research. The longest lived people in the world are eating mostly plants. And then we blue zone certify restaurants that offer at least 3 plant-based entrees. And then in schools that we help teach the lunchroom how to add more plant-based food into the school lunches. Sometimes it's doing things as simple as putting the vegetables first in line, because kids are more likely to pick them up and eat them than if they're last in lines when they're often overlooked. And then we work with city council. We have a food policy bundle that essentially favors fruits and vegetables over fast food and junk food. And there's about 30 different policies the city can adopt. And we don't tell them they have to do anything, but we show them the evidence. We help them come to consensus on what is effective and feasible for their city. And then our team over the next 3 to 5 years helps the city implement, pass the ordinances or programs, and then implement over the next 3 to 5 years. And we find it's very effective. In 3 cities in California, the beach cities, we were instrumental in lowering the average BMI of the entire city by about 14%. which translates to about 2,900 fewer obese people in a population of 125,000. So these subtle nudges applied with enough intensity over enough time at a population level, you see plant consumption going up significantly, and you see BMI, obesity, and all the chronic diseases that follow from that start to drop.
So really, if we can just get them to eat more vegetables and eat less meat, doesn't have to be 100%, doesn't have to be as strict as the blue zone people, you're going to still see results, right?
That's right. You won't get them all the way to blue zones, but if you get them 20% the way there, you'll see a commensurate drop in diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And mostly people need, if you want to get people to eat better food, they need 5 things. 1, it has to be accessible. 2, they have to be able to afford it. 3, their kitchens have to be set up so it's easy for them to make it. 4, they have to like it. I could tell you that broccoli will add 4 years to your life expectancy, but if you don't like broccoli, you might eat it for 3 or 4 months, but then you're going to quit eating it. And then the 5th thing is you need a social network around that kind of eating. So arguably, finding a half a dozen plant-based recipes that you like to eat, and then going out and making a few vegetarian friends are probably the 2 most powerful things you can do to change your diet for the long term and reap the benefits.
Wonderful. So let's talk about your new book on happiness. And I'm guessing that has a lot to do with the social network. Talk to me about what you found about how these people and why these people are so happy in the blue zones.
Well, first of all, the idea behind the blue zones is we find the people in the world who are most extraordinary, and then we reverse engineer what they do. So blue zones, it was about longevity, and we found 5 places. Happiness is about the different facets of happiness. So academically, happiness is a meaningless term. I mean, we all use it, and we kind of know what it means, but when you drill down, there are really 3 main facets to happiness, and they are how we evaluate our lives from day to day. Do we feel secure? Do we feel healthy? Are we doing what is expected of us in life? Are we using our skills? Number 2 is how we experience our life from day to day. Are we enjoying our lives moment to moment, day to day? And they're often mutually exclusive, evaluate our life and experience our life. So this afternoon, for example, I may want to sit on the porch and drink beer, and that might make me happiest. But at the end of the day, I'm probably not going to evaluate my life very highly, if all I did is sit around and drink beer all afternoon. And then the third one is purpose, which is measured by, do you do something new and interesting every day? So for this book and for a National Geographic cover story that's coming out on Monday, we found the 3 parts of the world that most illustrate these 3 different facets of happiness. And we divulge what triggers these types of happiness. And we make the point that if you want authentic, lasting happiness, you want to look at happiness a little bit the way you look at it, your financial life. You want a balanced portfolio of experiencing your life well, evaluating it nicely with pride, and then at the end, living your life with purpose and meaning.
So where are these places?
So, Singapore is the happiest place in Asia, but it best illustrates this notion of high life satisfaction or high evaluated happiness. Cartago, Costa Rica, highest level of experienced happiness. People love their life day to day, moment to moment. And then purpose was a town in northern Denmark called Aalborg. And the 3 of them come together to form a really nice composite of how we would ideally live our lives.
So when you talk about happiness, is it how much of it, as I was reading some of your books, it struck me, obviously you've got these social structures, these people, even in these places you're mentioning, the communities there, they eat together, the families are extended, they live together, they have this relationship. How much does that relationship, growing up in an extended family where the kid feels completely safe in their childhood, to allow themselves to fully be themselves, as opposed to in our culture where there's a lot of isolation. Kids have to kind of, engage in, develop, project a personality on the screen to be safe and secure in school and childhood, and oftentimes find that their happiness is based on the return on investment. I have to, if I'm liked or cared for or appreciated by others, I'm therefore happy. These groups seem to be content because it's their nature to be content, and they have a support system around them to do that. So I guess my question is, how much of the Power Nine, which a lot has to do with community and purpose and these things, how much of that relates to, and they're growing up in that environment, to their happiness?
Well, first of all, the Power Nine and Blue Zones and the Blue Zones of Happiness are completely separate books with separate tenets. But when you look at the happiest places in the world, none of them are happy by chance. There is a genesis to it. And in every case, 50 to about 150 years ago, some enlightened leaders put in place a number of policies that began an upward ratcheting of well-being and quality of life. And some of those early policies are favoring education over economic development, especially educating women, which produce healthier, smarter kids who grow up to be more productive and vote in better leaders, who would in turn make better decisions. Public health is way more important than health care and the way we think about it, i.e. making sure people don't get sick in the first place, rather than spending trillions of dollars as we do in America to fix the problem after it's happened. Most of our happiness or lack thereof is driven by the environment that we live in. And some of it is very hard to change, and some of it's really easy to change. And I essentially argue that if you want to get happier, forget all of these sort of positive psychology strategies of meditation and gratitude and savoring, because you won't remember to do it forever. However, if you change your environment, that creates a permanent intervention that can favor your happiness for years or decades. For example, if you live in a suburban cul-de-sac where the only way you can see your neighbor is cut across your lawn or go out in the street, you're much less likely to have frequent and quality social interactions than if you live in a tight neighborhood like I do, with sidewalks and neighbors nearby and coffee shops where I'm going to bump into people and grocery stores all in walkable distance. It turns out when you look at 2 million surveys done by the Gallup organization, you find the happiest Americans are socially interacting between 5 and 6 hours a day. And you might say, wow, that seems impossible. Well, it is impossible for most Americans who have an hour-long commute to work every day. They work 8 to 9 hours. They watch 4.4 hours of TV. They got to make lunch and dinner for their kids, and then they got to sleep some hours. So setting up your environment and your life so you're more likely to be happy is what I advocate, and the Blue Zones of Happiness suggests a blueprint for doing just that.
So how are you going to implement that into your Blue Zone solutions? I imagine that's the next level, right? It's not to feed people properly, but to actually get them to be happy, change their environment. What's the plan there? I imagine you have a plan, because it doesn't seem like you're stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, so we're getting very good at creating these policy bundles and helping a city work with those policy bundles to pick the ones that are right for their city. And we're developing a happiness bundle that will make cities more likely to be happy. So a few of them, there's a strong correlation between water quality and happiness. So if you live in a city with crappy water, like Flint, the poster child, but also even Reno, Nevada, again, building streets for humans and not just cars, putting up trees. There's a correlation between access to green space and happiness. So cleaning up parks, planting trees on the number of cities that have made deep investment in growing trees: Boulder, Colorado, San Luis Obispo. Nobody likes billboard signs. There are some places around America have decided that we don't want billboard sign because they encourage us to buy more stuff that we don't need and spend the money we have on ways that aren't going to optimize our happiness, and encourage us to buy food that isn't all that good for us. So there's a number of policies that cities can consider that will favor happiness for the citizens.
Does that include, like, there's a lot of research in Japan about forest bathing, and it increases psychology and happiness. And there's, like, I think 3 forests in Japan that are certified forest bathing hikes you can take to raise your mood and support your optimal health. Tons of studies about that. I live here in Boulder, Colorado, and I mean, there's more bike paths than there are roads, but they're actually shrinking roads and making bike paths bigger and bigger here, to the frustration of many people who are trying to still drive. But is that part of it as well, getting people outside, getting them to hike, sort of this nature deficiency disorder thing that Americans have?
Yeah, so think of your life in Boulder. You can have lunch and over your lunch you can go take a nature hike and be back in time for a 1 o'clock afternoon. You can bike across Boulder in less time than it takes to drive, and it is a relatively compact city with no high rises, so you still get that visual contact with green spaces. Yet there's a concentration of people. There's been a very active effort in your city to favor healthy foods. There's a correlation between the health of the food environment and the happiness of that environment. By the way, on pick up National Geographic on Monday, we profiled Boulder as the happiest place in America. So,
oh wow, really?
Neighbors will be pleased.
Wonderful. Well, definitely read that. Dan, this is great. I can't tell you how impressed I am the work that you're doing. I love the fact that you're implementing it and changing lives. It's so important. I've written 7 books, been doing this for a long, long time, and doing everything I can to make a dent in the culture, and nothing close to what you've done and are doing. And I really appreciate what you're doing for all of us, and bringing really important information back to us, and just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much. Good luck for this book. Everybody, this book is actually already out, the book on happiness. So please pick that up and get happy. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
It is such a joy. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.